Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be celebrating the new release of Nervous. And I just want to say welcome from Source Booksellers here in Detroit, Michigan. We have been waiting for this book to be released, and we're so happy to celebrate it. The week of its book birthday. And so just to let you know, if you're here in the Zoom, at the very bottom of your screen, you'll see closed captions. It says CC. If you need to read along, you're going to push show captions. And if there is any other need, I'm going to check the chat and make sure that's okay. And make sure that when it's time for questions, and even before, you can put your questions in the Q&A, which is also at the bottom of the screen. So today we're going to be celebrating author Jen Serino. She is a writer and movement builder who has long worked at the intersection of grassroots organizing, narrative strategy, and art-driven social change. She has won the Penelope C. Nevins Prize for Creative Nonfiction. Serino is also an independent scholar and performer and author of a chapbook called Making the Tongue Dry. She received a BA in History and Science from Harvard University and an MFA in Fiction and Nonfiction from Rainier Writing Workshop. She originated, I love this, at the landlocked part of Chicago, but now lives near a river and a part of the sea in Seattle. So she'll be in conversation with our beloved Adrienne Maree Brown, who grows healing ideas in public through her multi-genre work, her music, and her podcast. Informed by 25 years of movement facilitation, somatics, Octavia Butler Scholarship, and her work as a doula. Adrienne has nurtured emergent strategy, pleasure activism, radical imagination, and transformative justice as ideas and practice for transformation. She's the author and editor of several publications, texts, and code generator of a tarot deck, so watch out, and developing a musical ritual probably as we speak. So let's bring them on. And I do want to remind you that we are streaming on YouTube. If you know anyone that wasn't able to get in, which we hope everyone is. So we're ready for a fantastic conversation celebrating Nervous. Thank you.
Hi, Jen Soriano. Hi, Adrienne. And thank you, Allison. That was lovely.
We love Source Booksellers so much. And you and I have known each other for a very long time. And I want to say, it's very exciting to sit here writer to writer with you and get to talk about this work that you've been doing in this new iteration. I feel like we've been in these parallel journeys of being like, wait, I've got to sing songs. I've got to write books. I've got to bring my movement self into my body and into the world in this other way.
That's right.
And I wondered if we could start off. So much of this book is about breaking patterns of silence and like pushing ourselves out of spaces and times when we've been told we were supposed to stay silent. And so I wanted to ask everyone to just drop in for a moment into our bodies, drop into our breath, and really feel for where silence and that act of silencing, of people telling us we needed to stay silent, of people trying to mute our truths and mute reality, where that has landed in our bodies. So where does silence as an external pressure live inside your body? And are there places inside where silence has maybe become a part of you or feels like a part of you? Yeah. Mm. Yeah, Jen, I'm curious for you. Where does silence live in your body?
I felt it in my right throat, which was not a surprise because that's a part of my body that has given me the most trouble, I would say, for most of my life. We definitely have a relationship. It's a very difficult one. And it has in the past felt like a baseball stuck in my throat. Now it's kind of whittled down to maybe a ping pong ball because of the healing journey I've been on, but it still felt very present there. But the surprise was that I also felt it in my left shoulder. And that is a place where, and I write about this in the book, a body worker, a very witchy body worker, said that she heard a word come from my shoulder, and
Is
it was
this
a
the one with the willowy arms?
exactly like
I was like, I can see this person. Okay.
yes, the willowy like catwalk model. And yeah, and she said that she heard the word remorse in that shoulder, and she didn't even know what that word meant. She's just like, I just hear this word. What does this word mean?
Wow.
And I didn't know what that word meant at the time, but I did get a tattoo in that shoulder, kind of like extreme acupuncture style.
Love it. That's how I use my tattoos too. I'm like, oh, you know what we're gonna do? Ink you forever.
Yes, and it works. It's like, yes, it's like endorphins, baby. Like bring some endorphins into that area. I need some pain relief. And the tattoo that I ended up getting was palayain, which in Tagalog means to set free. So it's all coming together now through that somatic exercise that you just led us through.
You know, I think that right now we're all learning new ways of being able to be conversant as these body minds, as these somatic entities, which it's like, oh, the more I'm embodied, the more I can actually communicate directly. And then the more I discover, like every time I turn in to look at my body in any way, I'm like, oh, there's so much data. I now know the rest of my life just tuning into like each inch of my body and being like, tell me the story that you know. Now you tell me the story that you know. And there would be so many stories there. And I kind of, I'm like, I wish we could take a break as a species and just be like, let's just listen to our systems. Let's listen to our systems and hear the way. I want to invite anyone who's in the call with us, if you feel like sharing, this can be a beautiful way of mapping your bodies publicly a little too. If you feel like sharing, where does silence live in your bodies? I know for me, as soon as I dropped in, I felt like a pressure around my face and my head, like almost like literally like a downward, just like pressing in on me. And it feels familiar, right? That it feels like as if one of the people who trained me to be quiet is looking at me and I'm like,
yeah. Yeah.
It's like I've learned to do the motion, even if no one is there actually going, right? Pull yourself together, keep that in. And then for years, my silencing was very literally in my throat. And do you know Mama Lisa Thomas Adeyemo?
I don't.
So Mama Lisa was in Oakland, was a healer in Oakland. She's since moved over to Massachusetts. But she did this somatic practice with me for a year where I would go in and she would tie a scarf around my jaw and my throat like this and just get it super tight and held. And then it would make my jaw release because it was like being held and attended
Because you
to.
felt the support and you
Exactly.
didn't have to do it yourself.
It was like, okay, I don't have to lot, and I didn't even know, like, I look back at pictures now from my early 20s or whatever, and everything looks like this. I'm like, hi, I was living my whole life with like all of this locked. And it's like all
Mhm.
of these storytelling and testifying and all of that has been this unlocking process. So
So
yeah, tell me
Well, so
what you
well, I was going to just point out that there's a lot of great sharing in the chat. And
okay,
so I
good.
definitely want to talk about that in a second, but I also want to just like respond to that really quick with something that a healer that I've been going to in Seattle, who calls himself the Bone Whisperer, and I write about him in the
You're
book as
seeing the Bone Whisperer?
oh, do you know the Bone Whisperer? Did you learn about
Santa
him?
told me about the Bone Whisperer. I have heard
Yeah,
about the
so
Bone Whisperer.
yes,
Oh my
yes.
gosh, I
So
want to come see
this
him.
is Bone Whisperer.
Okay.
And he talks about how there's points in our body that are kind of natural points for supporting our entire structure.
Yeah.
And that how and trauma can disrupt those natural points. And so then we end up feeling like we have to hold our entire selves up by our jaw
That's
or
right.
by our shoulders. Right. And I see people saying like
Yeah.
diaphragms, like we're holding our breath literally, and our diaphragms are literally being held up because when we breathe, they go down. Right. And so support, like you're talking about, is everything.
It's everything. And it's also like authenticity lives here, right? So like once you start to tune in and notice, like now in myself, if I'm talking to someone and I notice that my shoulders have come up and forward, that my chin is tucked in a little bit, I'm like, oh, I don't feel safe here. And I don't even have to know why. And I've been like, I used to be like, overcorrect, just chill it all out. And I'm like, no, I don't feel safe here.
Yeah. Right.
That's the important data. It's not like,
right.
it's not like fix my body. It's like fix the circumstance. All right. So
fix this. That's the message of my entire book.
That's the message of the book. So let's get into this book. So I think the first thing I wanted to ask you, because it's this collection of essays. And I know for me, I'm often writing essays years and years before they actually make it into anyone else's viewpoint, right? And so I wanted to, these feel like they're rooted in your whole life. Like there's stuff in here that feels like, okay, it's essays that do some of the work of memoir and some of the work of like medical journal and some of the work of like spell casting and some of the work of time travel. So I wanted to ask you, when did you start writing this book? When do you know that you're writing this book?
Well, you're right. I have been writing it my whole life. And don't worry, I will tell you all like what, practically when I actually started writing it also. But I think it's an important point to make because I really believe as a writer that, well, let me start by saying, actually, I really don't believe as a writer in that whole saying that you just have to sit your ass in chair to be a writer. I mean, it's true. You got to sit your ass in chair to finish a book, but that is different. That's different from actually writing as a process and a practice and a ritual. And I have been writing this book my whole life. And I do feel like my ancestors have been writing this book as well. So in a lot of ways, it's a long time coming. And I've been talking about how it's like 47 years coming, but also it's probably several generations coming. And the turning point where I actually started putting pen to paper was when I had my only child. And that was a very significant turning point for a lot of reasons that I write about in the book. An extremely difficult, psychologically difficult experience, as well as physically difficult experience with pregnancy. And and also it was a moment that was significant because it was a time where I could transition from a lifestyle where I had been working maybe 60 to 80 hours a week in movement work to focusing more internally on care for this creature, care for myself as I was recovering from birth, and creation. And so I made a deliberate choice to also start creating in terms of writing my story. So it's been about, I mean, my kid is 9 now, so it's really been about 9 years.
Ooh, 9
actually
is such a good number. I love anything that gestates for 9, anything. I'm just like, that's right. So
Up around 9, right?
hey,
I'm not really
9,
from
yeah, well, and I just turned 45, and so I'm like, I'm in a 9 year, and so I've just been really noticing the spiral impact of 9, like what 9 is the way into the in and out of the labyrinth. 9 is the way in and out of that's the way that energy moves in and out of the body. It's the way, yeah, it's like we're in some ways we're as much 9s as we are human beings, So the other question I would ask you, I think that we're in this generation that is like, I think many generations have dealt with all kinds of autoimmune disorders and nervous system things and mental illness things and like all kinds of stuff that was undiagnosed or misdiagnosed or misunderstood, or there was just like, we're so busy focused on basic survival that we just can't focus necessarily on how we feel, right? That was the idea. And so I know for you that getting the diagnosis of central sensitivity syndrome had something to do with the impulse to write this book. And I want to ask you, basically, how did you know you needed to write this book? And what was the role of the central sensitivity syndrome inside of that impulse?
I think I knew I needed to write the book before I got the kind of like catalyst that helped me do that. And the central sensitization diagnosis was a catalyst.
Okay.
So I knew I needed to write this book because I was listening to my body, and it's like you're saying, it's like, what happened? What would happen if we actually listen to all these stories in our body? And there's this Rilke quote that I wanted to share with folks because it has absolutely been, I think, an amazing expression of how I knew that I needed to write this book.
Yeah.
And the quote is, "The work of the eyes is done. Go now and do the heart work on the images imprisoned within you." And I felt that there were images inside me. There were stories that were calling out to me to be released.
Yeah.
So I knew I needed to write something, right? And so I was like, okay, now comes that whatever messy, mystical process of like, you just try to translate some of that.
Yeah.
But when I got diagnosed with central sensitization, that was like the catalyst that gave me a frame for what I was going to write.
Okay.
And the frame was, oh, okay, central sensitization is an umbrella term for conditions that affect the nervous system.
Yeah.
And how ironic that I was raised and almost quite literally fed by nervous system care, by someone who is an expert in the nervous system,
Your father, right?
not able to help me, in the ways that I needed help. And so that kind of started this whole question about why so, and very much got into structural answers about that, not so much interpersonal answers, about how he was trained in Western medicine versus what our bodies actually need to be healthy. And so it was like, okay, well, there's my framework. Guess I should start writing into that, combining the stories of the body with, the exploration of our nervous system.
Beautiful. And do you feel like the writing of the book has impacted how you carry your nervous system, how you move with your nervous system?
It has. And it's something that I really wanted to share through the book, which is that one of the things that I think keeps us very, I guess, keeping ourselves down, I would say, right, in terms of a form of internalized depression, is the Western and very American notion of, I think, therefore I am, I can will myself out of things. You have your individual responsibility to overcome any ailments, any weakness within you. And the way that the nervous system actually works defies all that completely. Absolutely, completely defies and shows that that is a complete myth. When you understand how the nervous system works, you basically have a model for how the rest of society probably should work, which is interdependence. The nervous system is interdependent on the rest of our bodily systems, but it's also interdependent on bodies outside of ourselves, on other people's nervous systems, and on our environments. And also, most of our nervous system is not our brain, and it's not mostly the part that we can control by conscious will. It is mostly a subconscious process that's about sensing from our body, sensing from our environment, and autonomic processes of regulation that are very much central to our health. Being able to maintain that kind of regulation is essential to our health, and we can influence it, but not through thinking, through somatic practice and through engagement with our environment. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And that's a very, no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, it sounds so simple. Like it's so intriguing to me constantly that I'm like, why we have invested so much into systems that don't allow us to do that simple work of being like, oh, I live in an interdependent body system inside of an interdependent society. And so obviously we should have structures that support that, but instead everything is actually trying to cut that off for the sake of control.
Exactly, for the sake of control. And I mean, you could argue that all of our systems right now are actually systems that are built from trauma reactions, right? They're built on principles of defense. Defense, accumulation at the cost of others, as opposed to mutual aid, and fear. Right, like fear and individualism, because collectivism actually runs counter to all of those values. So yes, somebody said bottom up regulation, and that is very much how our nervous systems work. And I just wanted to say also at this point that like pretty much the last section, the whole last section of the book is influenced by emergent strategy, because it is it's the whole last section of the book is called neuromimicry, and it's very much influenced by this idea that our systems that we need to solve human problems should not be like divorced from or separate from the systems of nature, including our own bodies, because we are part of nature. And
I saw this is one of the pages that I like folded, as I was moving through it, that neuromimicry is the process of drawing inspiration from nervous system design and applying it to the way we care for one another and our environments. And I got so excited by this. I feel like even when I was working on emergent strategy, there was still such an externalization for me of like, I'm looking at the natural world outside of my human system, because clearly the human system is just dysfunctional or whatever, like I still hadn't quite gotten to the place of like, oh no, I am part of the divine design. Our bodies are part of the divine design, and just understanding how we're structured in the lungs and the nervous system and all of it. So it was like really beautiful. I'm just like, oh, this feels like an advance of that work and like a deepening of it. I'm really excited.
I hope so.
I felt the same way you did when you were like, I'm doing my best and I've done my best research, and I'm not like the scientist, I'm not the doctor, but I'm like, but we are paying attention to these things and we are trying to see the patterns from our perspectives.
And I mean, I think, all your work and what my book is trying to be as well is it's what like the literary world calls auto theory, right? Where it's like our own experiences are the expertise
that we draw on.
Yeah, for developing these larger theories, because we are part of, we are part of a larger world. It's actually
Exactly.
not that big of a stretch to project individual experience to, larger
Yeah.
system change.
Well, and especially the more you have that fractal understanding, it's like, oh, what's happening to my nervous system is a part of what's happening to all of our systems because of these structures that we're part of. And I think that was the interesting piece too. So I'm going to ask, I have one more question that I prepared. I want to make room for people who have shown up, who want to ask questions. There is a Q&A box. Feel free to drop questions in there and I will come and draw from them. But the question I had for you, so I loved at the beginning of this book, there's a section that says a brief history of her pain. And it goes through and it's basically like a timeline of experiences you've had, diagnoses you've had, interactions, healing moments you've had. But it creates this timeline, this tender timeline that takes you, we're all back in BC, 500 BC. Like, I was just like, okay, Jen Soriano, like you're really placing yourself into time. So the question I wanted to ask you is, how has writing this book impacted your relationship to time, both the timeline of your own life and pain, and also the time that we're in now? Like, what is this time for our bodies and for our interactive systems?
I love this question. And I am trying to buy myself more time to think of an answer because it's a really deep question.
Well, take a moment and feel free. Your body knows the answer to this already.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I had, a writer friend poet laureate of San Diego, actually, Jason Magoba Perez, say to me, what's that?
I said, poet laureate always sounds like the fanciest thing you can be to me.
I know, right? Poet laureate of San Diego. And he's so not fancy in a good way. And he said to me, your writing plays with time a lot. Yes. And I hadn't ever thought of it that way. And that's because I think I'm writing how I experience things in my body. And how I experience things with my body apparently is not just in linear time. Right. I'm actually just realizing this right now. I literally am just
awesome.
Right now.
I love when that
happens.
happens.
Like, that first essay where I'm jumping back and forth across, literally thousands of years of history.
Thousands of years.
Is in a lot of ways, it is how I experience time. I mean, when I was lying awake, when I'd be lying awake at 3 a.m. in pain, unable to sleep, yes, I would feel like, oh, what if I was experiencing this pain and making these weird noises and kind of like having this trembling and like rocking and uncontrollable movements in my body, back in the 1800s, like, how would this have been treated? And it was very less in my mind than like really just my whole body, making me realize that like, oh, like feeling like this has happened before. Like, this is not the first time that my body has experienced this, and others have experienced this as well, so I think that there is, I think that there's both, I'm trying to hold both this, this sense of, cycles that happen that are natural, right? And it's talking about biomimicry cycles, and be able to put those on the page and then talk about what are cycles that we want to recover, what are cycles that we want to break, and what are cycles that we're not sure about yet. How can we examine these things? Because history can repeat itself if we don't examine it, and that is not always a good thing. It's usually not. And sort of the things that have been taken from us when you're colonized or otherwise targeted people, those things also don't get recovered without deliberate examination. And so, being able to look at how the past plays itself out again in the present and how that could affect the future, which is something you think a lot about, right?
Yes.
Um,
I'm like,
with Afrofuturism, especially, I think is a really radical practice, because, you know, in addition to current capitalistic white supremacist society, you know, dividing us from each other, it also seeks to divide us from our past and from imaginations about our future as
yeah,
well
I
as
really appreciate
our
that.
body.
You
Yeah.
know, this idea for me of silence and time also is a real serious dance where it's just like, I always feel like this is where colonizers, this is one of the places where colonizers have been so brilliant, is just like, we'll just let some time pass. Like, y'all are angry now, but we're just gonna let some time pass. And like, time will, you know, it'll kind of push along. There's just so much inside of it that eventually you'll forget. And there's this, if you like, I think about all the time how much that those who were causing us harm thought we were going to forget, because they were like, well, you're not going to be able to write it down, and you're not going to be able to keep your own language, and you're not going to be able to do this, and like, we're going to keep you from being able to share with each other, and so you're not going to remember it. And the revolutionary reality that our bodies do remember it, and they remember it across space and time and across
Yeah.
generations,
Yeah.
is for me, like, it's been so humbling. You know, when I'm just like, oh, I'm in, like, I have this pain, you know, when you were saying like, what would it be like in the 1800s? I'm like, I have this chronic, I have all kinds of chronic pain, but I have this particular chronic pain in my hip. And one of the things that's been happening whenever I go in to get it healed, I have this worker, she's like, this is actually a wound from enslavement. And
Mm.
like, this wound has moved down through your, you know, she's like, I bet if you talk to your grandmother, your great grandmother, this wound is the wound of that's in your family line, and you're the one who's carrying it. And I'm like, but how do you know that? And she's like, because your body knows that.
Mm.
Your body knows where this comes from. There's nothing that happened in your life that created this. This predated that. And your opportunity, as every opportunity, is to be the one who turns and faces it. And only, you know, that it's only by facing it might it possibly begin to change, or might something else become possible. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's what's happening in the pages of your book, is you being like, I'm carrying these things that are multi-generational, and I'm going to just turn and face them. And I'm just going to bring light onto them. And by
Mm.
bringing light onto them, I know something else can grow in that space simply by unsilencing,
Mm.
undrowning, right?
Drowning. Yeah.
Uncovering, right? And that's the apocalypse. Is, I think we are an apocalyptic generation. And I'm
Mm.
just thinking about this now too, but I'm just like, I feel like that's the apocalypse of our generation, is like, we're the ones who are like, we're going to reveal all of it.
Mhm.
We're going to reveal all of it, and then figure out a new way forward that comes from being in relationship to all that is, rather than living on top of the layers of silence.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
is. Yeah.
I completely agree. I want to know more about what you mean by apocalyptic generation, because I from everything that you've said, I am feeling you, and this has been very much what I have been. It's what I end the book on, and what I've been kind of talking about as like, okay, so where do we go from here? Which is that I really believe we are in a healing era.
Yes.
We're in a generation, or several interlocking generations of time, where we can heal what our ancestors were not able to heal.
Yeah.
And we have to do it because we're facing more crises than ever.
Right.
So is that what you mean by apocalyptic?
So I think so, right? Like, you know, I've been in the study of apocalypse, I think my whole adult life in some way. And for a long time, it was really dystopian and very fearful. Like, I was just like everything's going to end. How do we prepare for that? And then the more I've turned into it, it's been like, apocalypse just means being able to really reveal the truth of a situation in such a way that it might fall apart, or in such a way that like things can fall
Oh, is that
away,
what it
right?
means? Okay.
I didn't understand that, you know, for the longest time I was like, oh, apocalypse means explosion, destruction. And it's like, no, apocalypse means revealing, right?
Mhm.
Apocalypse is a time, you know, revelations, right? In the Christian concept of the end of things is the revelation of all things, right? And
Mm.
so a lot of times what we mean by it's like, once we have revealed the things that have been kept secret in a society, or in an empire, or in an industry, right, then that thing falls apart, right? The structure that allows for things to be hidden and painful and harmful has to fall apart. And it feels terrifying if you're at the top of that structure.
Mhm.
It can feel really crushing if you're at the bottom of that structure. But I think when you're in somewhere in the middle of that structure where you're like, okay, there's organizing, there's storytelling, there's art making that can help everyone in every part of this structure understand that there's something else because we are cyclical beings. So
Mm.
to me, I'm like, if we understand like the apocalypse is inevitable and continuous, and part of our job is to figure out what is our work to do. And I get
Mm.
really excited by it then, because I'm like, you know, as a doula, my constant orientation is like, every time, every being is giving birth to new things. And what am I giving birth to? What are you giving birth to? What is our generation giving birth to? What is our earth trying to give birth to? I think about this in this like continuous cycle. And I'm like, if we're the doulas, then that's one role. If we're the birth givers, that's another role. What if we have to be both and all things at the same time? Right.
Mm.
And like, that's how I'm trying to roll with my communities now, is that I'm like, on any given day, I'm fluidly going to be the doula for your transformation, while also you being the doula for my transformation. If we, you know, are all holding hands in a circle, being like, down, push, you got this, open, wide, and also birthing the things that can only come through us.
Well, that is just such a beautiful expression of interdependence. And
Exactly.
interdependence not as like a static state, but as a practice, as a
Dynamic.
verb. And in what you were describing, it's such the opposite of status quo, right? It's such the opposite of stasis. And
Yes.
I think a lot of my book is trying to
Mm,
make the case for the risk of breakdown is worth it.
it's worth
Right.
it.
It's worth it, right? So some of y'all might be familiar with the whole concept of a healing crisis, which is basically where you get a lot worse before you get better once you choose to start to heal.
Yeah.
And I think I would dare say that a lot of, kind of building off of what we were talking about before around how a lot of our current structures are trauma reactive structures, right? I dare say that a lot of our current society is basically set up around patriarchal attempts to not break down, right? Like, don't be in touch with your emotions, right? Because emotions are hella powerful, you
Yes.
know? Don't be in touch with your body because your body is also hella powerful,
Yes.
but in a way that threatens the idea of like, patriarchal, capitalistic, white supremacist control, right? And so being able to be in more of the cyclical kind of relationship of continuous apocalypse and birth that comes from the wisdom of our bodies
Yes.
that's very different from what we have right
Very
now.
different from the training. And it also means, I mean, for me, at least in a very like daily level, it's
Mhm.
meant that my orientation towards discomfort and pain is very different,
Mhm.
because for such a long time, I think I was like, I must numb this. I must silence this
Yeah.
communication from my body immediately. Like,
Mhm.
this is not good. And instead now I'm trying to be like, oh, this pain is trying to communicate something to me. And if it's something that I can hear and respond to, um, which might be, that's enough, you've done enough today, right? Or it might be, you need to make a dietary shift, or there's some shifts that I can't make. Like, there's some stuff that feels like, oh, the environment that I live in, the air that I breathe is already beyond the level of toxicity that my system can integrate. And there's like, I can't live inside of a tiny little bubble, right? So how do I live? But I'm like, if I think of this as data as opposed to as an attack, then how does that shift my response to it?
Mhm. Mhm.
We have
Yeah.
good questions here from our folks that
Okay.
I want to bring into the conversation, because I think they're related. It's interesting. 3 of them feel like they're touching into each other. So I'm going to weave them together. The core, there's, how did you care for yourself and your nervous system while writing this book? And there's 2 other questions that also, I'm like, they feed into this. what was your process for writing in such an embodied way?
Mm.
Writing through the body, mind, spirit is such complex, hard work. What was your process for writing in such an embodied way? And what
Mm.
advice do you have for other writers who often have to push back against the
Mm.
entrenched Cartesian academic norms, top-down norms?
Mhm.
And the other question that feels related to this is, how does it feel experiencing this? How has sharing your experience publicly in writing affected your relationship to your body? And how are you engaging in processes to nourish yourself and your body as the book is out in the world? So for me, it's just like the fundamental question is like, Jen, how did you care for and nourish yourself as you went through this?
Mhm.
How did you do that writing in this embodied way? And how are you caring for yourself as it's in the world?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for all those questions. And also, yes, I agree. They're all very, it's like layers of the same thing. So I think I think I am impulsively a somatic writer. I definitely follow deep bodily urges in my writing. And in a lot of ways, when I was going through writing this book, I did have to stop and ask myself with, my like thinking brain, like, why am I doing this?
Why
Wait,
this?
why this? Why is this something that you chose for me to do? Because it is extremely difficult to write very personal nonfiction, as any of you who do that knows. It's very difficult. It can feel like rewounding.
Yes.
And then honestly, on top of that, just to keep it real, like to then have insights about all of that deep personal stuff is like another layer of difficulty. But it felt like I was having to like dig into my gut and then pull out the organ to then teach everybody what the organ is. So it felt very physical, actually, like physical labor. And so I cared for myself by making sure that I promised myself I would ask for help whenever I needed it, which is a hard thing to do, but I did, and I always found it. And some of you all who were my support system through this are on this call, and you know who you are. So thank you. So I highly encourage you to definitely, even if it's just one or two people, lean on those people if you're writing this type of very deep, excavating type of personal work. And on the part about what advice would I have, who for writers who have to push back against the top-down norm in academia? I would say honestly, somatic exercises, anything that comes naturally to you, whether that's deep breathing, whether that's meditation, an example is what Adrienne led us through, can be as simple as that before you start writing. And asking parts of your body to speak to you, which doesn't even have to be such a willful thing. It's more like an allowing. It really is just a kind of like a sitting and listening. And just giving yourself some of that time before going into the doing of needing to fulfill an academic task or I think can really help then your body become your guide. And then experience publicly sharing. Well, I have to say that going through 8 to 9 years of this practice of listening to my body, it has definitely made me a lot less anxious about speaking in public than before. And it's because now I'm like, well, I'm just going to let my body speak and I'm going to trust it. And it has been working. Whereas before I would get all up in my head and be like, what are the exact points I want to say with the right word, and sound intelligent, but cool and funny at the same time. And I just don't have that anymore. Those voices aren't there because my body's just like, I got you. You're listening to me. We've been in a conversation in practice of that. And that's going to continue. We're going to share with people.
I love this, Jen. It feels like so much of what we're actually doing is rebuilding trust between our body selves and our mind selves and our spirit selves. It's like that actually understanding that these systems actually make us distrust ourselves and turn against ourselves and operate against ourselves. and then we're rebuilding trust. When it's like, oh, this is, I've started doing all this stuff where, which I'm sure is very annoying to people who are trying to work with me, but where I'm like, I'm not going to do a prep conversation for a conversation, because I trust my body and I trust the body of the person I'm with to show up in real time and have the conversation. And I'm like, I don't want to prep it and then try to remember what I already experienced, because the world will have changed completely in the 3 days between then and now. And I'm like, I can actually trust myself. And I think part of it is what you said about listening to the body. I wonder if you would also say reaching back through time and basically I found myself retethering my relationships to the ancestors that I can name and those that I can't name. Because as I listen to my body, I'm like, oh, my body is already connected to all of these lineages. And so even releasing the idea that I'm operating on my own gives me so much relaxation that I'm like, oh, like I'm not just counting on myself when I'm asked to share something or when I'm asked to know something. We know something about it, even if all we know is that we don't know, or we have a question, or we got hurt there, or something else. But it, it's like, oh, I'm rebuilding trust that I am a lineaged, networked body. And then if I don't know, I almost always am like, but I can tell you who you should go read Alexis, or you should now go read Jen Soriano's book Nervous, or like I'm like, I can point and be like, I don't know that much about it, but I'm connected to a world that knows. Yeah.
It's an interconnected web. It's like the mycelium that you drew inspiration from, of knowledge, and all of this stuff. I know Alexis is deeply drawing from ancestral knowledge. I'm deeply drawing from ancestral knowledge, and so it's part of that continuation and reinterpretation of cycles, right? It's not like any one of us invented this shit, but we are claiming it for the era that we're in because it's so needed. And was just going to quickly say also this thing about how so interdependence goes in like all dimensions is what you're talking about, right? It's interdependence here in the present plane with other beings, non-human, spirit world, but also across time and space and planes, ancestral interdependence, all of those things. And it just brought up a point that I wanted to make about how another thing that's at stake in trying to build a trauma-wise organized world as opposed to a trauma reactive organized world is a relationship to the past that is a generative and healthy relationship to the past, like what you described, like my ancestors got my back, as opposed to what happens when we don't metabolize trauma, which is it is like an imprisoned relationship to the past, where we're constantly, when we're triggered, then we are constantly acting out of past experience, right? And not like actually being in the present and being able to see people for who they are, being able to have the interactions that we're having in the present, right? Instead, we're like, oh my gosh, like that person said something that triggered me. And so now that person was all of a sudden, you are all of a sudden not Adrienne, you're all of a sudden that person that triggered me back then. And I'm going to treat you like that person, right? And so something that's at stake is the type of being able to develop a very like clear, engaged presence that can help us reclaim the things we want from the past.
That's right.
And what we don't, and move into the future that way.
I really love that, Jen. And it really feels like I'm in so many more relationships now that feel like they reflect the wisdom of this book, which is like, I should only be in relationships where I can express honestly in real time what is happening in my nervous system, what is coming up from my gut. I've been having so many experiences lately where I'm like able to say to someone, I'm feeling away, and can I unpack it with you? Because it feels like you're making me feel the way, but actually I think if I unpack it, something else might come up. And it's been so exciting to be like, I'm uncomfortable. Like I lost a dear friend in April, and this has been a season. We've lost, I think, there's just so many people.
It's been rough. Yeah.
And so there's this undercurrent of grief all the time now, where it's like, I don't know why, but I think when I was younger, it was like, oh, grief. Now I'm in a grief moment, and now I'm not in a grief moment. And I'm like, oh, now I'm never not in a grief moment. It's just how much is it at the front of my attention? But it's so beautiful to notice that I can be in relationship with other people where we're like, we're grieving. And the thing you said just hurt my feelings, but it hurt my feelings because I miss my friend. And
Mhm.
like I was like, if we can talk about it, I can find the wiring. But sometimes the trust is also like, I can't explain the whole wiring, but this is connected. And I'm like, we can be in a relationship where we can hold the complexity of that.
Yes.
We have
Yes.
2 more questions in here that I want to get to.
Great. Okay.
I could talk to you about this stuff for the rest of our lives, and I hope that we will.
We will.
I'm like, oh, I'm lit up, but I'm like disciplined. So Jamie Cardenas, Jamie, maybe it's Jamie. What advice can you give to another decolonizing Pinksy mama who has a child with selective
My
mutism?
goodness. Okay, well, we need to definitely talk
Yeah,
offline
that's
for sure.
like a phone
Um,
date, a lunch date.
So many things to talk about, but I can say very, very quickly that the selective mutism, and this is a phrase, the phrase I'm about to say is something that comes from work that Adrienne has done with generative somatics, with people like Kandawala and Stacey Haynes.
Yeah.
The selective mutism is taking care of something.
Yes.
And you might not know what that something is.
Yeah.
My child has also experienced selective mutism at times. And it's been hard because it's a trigger for me. I've been like, I don't want you to be like me, like just talk, like interact. And then I've had to really just tell my nervous system to settle down, take a back seat, and realize that what this is about is our bodies protecting ourselves. So it's taking care of something. I would encourage you to also look up, if you haven't already, if you don't know about highly sensitive children, because it may be that your child fits into that profile. And if that's the case, then one of the things that selective mutism is taking care of is the fact that highly sensitive children often have selective mutism, and it's because they are extremely alert to the world and they are absorbing everything. And in that absorption, that is their being. They're not necessarily ready to digest and process and share much of it yet. Right. So that's one of the approaches that you could look into.
I love that. I love it. So I want to drop a link in here. I don't know if you saw this, but there was this ebook that came out a while ago called The Silent History. And it was about a generation where kids basically have stopped talking. And it's actually a large scale response to collective trauma, but the kids basically all go silent over the course of like a generation or 2 generations. And it's this book that tells the story from it's like a lot of different people telling the story. Anyway, I'm going to drop this.
I just got like goosebumps from that.
It gave me goosebumps too. And it made me, it reminded me of Speech Sounds by Octavia Butler. It reminded me of like literally being around all the children in my life and seeing how directly connected the verbosity and the level of attention that they're getting and the level of, I'm just like, yeah, I'm watching a lot of kids who are like, they're very verbose when they're younger. And then as they get older and everything becomes more digital and more texted and more this and more that, it just shifts. It shifts. And there's a lot of quieting. And there's a lot of kids who are like, actually, I'm an introvert, or all of my expression is going to be text. And I can feel that even happening in myself, where I'm like, I'm getting more communicative in digital ways and other ways. I'm really interested in like, how quickly can we get to telepathy and just being able to be like,
well, I think that some of that body work stuff where they can read, what your body is telling you, like, oh, that your body just told me that as a wound from enslavement.
Yes. I'm like,
it's kind of like it already happens for some people.
It happens for some people. And I'm like, if I was running the world, a lot of our school systems would be actually focused on that rather than focused on, like, how do you do the algebra? I'm like, no. How do you feel your body? And how do you feel the bodies of the other people around you? And how do you recognize that, 90+% of all the communication is nonverbal and it's actually happening at energetic levels? I would love that. Okay. The final question here is from Amora Blessing. And then I want to do a little exercise to close this out. How would you connect or compare the process of birthing your child and healing from that to the process of writing this book and how you've healed your body through the writing?
Man, these are all such amazing
Great
questions. I
right?
feel like, we could all write whole books in answer to these questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just gonna try to be brief. Oh God, that's gonna be hard. So I guess they are both pretty similar in that they both involved quite a lot of pain and gain at the psychological and physical level.
Yeah.
And actually just last night I was having a moment after I had a in-person event to celebrate my book at my neighborhood bookstore. And afterwards I was just lying awake in good ways because I was just buzzing from all the love. And even though we have a house that is fairly roomy, it's like me and my husband and my child always end up in the same bed together. And so like it was just all three of us kind of like snuggling while I was buzzing, feeling all this like love of like interdependence and decolonization, and just feeling like, oh gosh, like there is something that Resmaa Menakem, somatic therapist Resmaa Menakem, author of My Grandmother's Hands, called clean pain. And that is pain that has been metabolized and dealt with when you face trauma. And I feel like both going through pregnancy and birth and recovery and writing this book was a process of cleansing the pain and feeling rewards after.
Oh, I love that. Jen, thank you so much for writing this book, and thank you for being in conversation with me and others around it. And I thought just to close out, it would be good to just touch back into our bodies and notice how the places where silence lives in us might be feeling now, where there's just been some invitation, some meaning making of why we might open and why we might share. So noticing for you, if something feels a little less silenced, if some part of you feels a little more spacious. And I know that there's a ton of people here who are saying they're reading this book cover to cover. They normally don't do that. It's been hard to read books, but this is opening people up emotionally, spiritually. The book is so beautiful. So I want to make sure you also hear that and take that in. I saw your question. I think that you can click in the place where you can chat. There's like a triple button, little 3 dots. If you click that, you should be able to click it and it says save chat.
I think that, oh, you're right. Thank you. Thank you with your Zoom skills.
Look, okay, I'm learning the internet. Auntie knows how to do internet. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. And this is going to stay up on YouTube. It's going to live on YouTube. So you can send other people to watch it, Aftermath. And go buy this book, Nervous by Jen Soriano. Looks like this with a gorgeous nervous system on the front. You can buy it through Source Booksellers. You can buy it through or your local bookstores is the only other place we like to buy things. Oh, my books too. Get all of our books. They're all deeply interconnected and interwoven. Yeah, and we love you, Jen. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Adrienne. I love you too. And thank you, Allison and Source. Thank you, everybody.
For being with us.
This is like such as connective as a Zoom can get.
I know, I feel you. I feel you, and send love to your baby and your husband.
Thank you.
All right. Allison, anything
Thank you all.
Okay.
The call to action is to support this book online with us or in store or any independent bookstore that's near you.
And have Jen come talk about it.
Yes.
Love to. Let me know.
Adrienne, thank you for everything that you're writing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm working hard. I'm going to finish that trilogy. It's going to happen. I love y'all.
Love y'all too. Let's sing sometime.
Oh, you know what? Someone put in the chat the lyrics for Lean on Me, the part that I love the most, which is
The breakdown. Like,
if there is a load you need to bear that you can't carry, I'm right up the road and I'll share your load if you just call me. Call on
call
me
me when
when you need
friend
a hand. We all need
need
somebody
somebody
to
to
lean
lean
on.
on. Yes. That just happened.
Yes, that happened. That I tell people all the time, I'm like, when you're confused about interdependence, just go listen to Lean on Me. Bill Withers like just wrote a song about it, and it's all good.
So,
Okay,
we have a whole nother Zoom about Bill Withers and music, which maybe we should someday.
I would still be down for that. Okay, I love you.
Love you too.
Bye, everyone.
Okay,
Thank
take care,
you.
everyone.